That's it, by the way. So I'm going to talk to you today about the journey that Skype has been on. Skype has now been Agile for quite some time. And also this idea now that Satya, I don't know whether you're familiar with Satya, who's now the new CEO of Microsoft, has said that everybody in Microsoft should move towards being a growth hacker. How many of you have heard the term growth hacker? Any of you know what a growth hacker is? Anybody? Well, a growth hacker, if you want to look it up, and the references are at the end of the slides, so I've given you a whole stack of references. I didn't want to clutter the slides up with where to find the terms, but they're all at the end, so I believe you can download the decks at the end. A growth hacker is somebody, it came from a marketing background, where the idea is that for startups who have no money, how do you generate growth? How many of you are from a startup? Very few. Few. Okay. So you guys know about having no money, right? My background is I ran 2 startups, sold 2, worked in 1 management buyout. We sold that management buyout. I then went to work for IBM and ended up owning for 2 years the head of the Agile Leadership Council in IBM, where there were 25,000 developers. That was exciting. And at the same time, then I decided I'd move into Skype and help with the Skype journey, and now Skype is owned by Microsoft. Skype itself was a startup. The interesting story is it went from 0 to 23 million users in 18 months with no marketing budget. That's what growth hackers do. Growth hackers do interesting things. Growth hackers use experimentation. They use data. One of the things they try and do is they create experiments to use data so they can find out what the marketplace wants quicker. They experiment, they throw new ideas out there, they see how many of them stick, they move on to the next set of experiments. So it sounds agile, right? The other thing they look at is they look at building networks. So if you look at Skype, Skype's a perfect example where the idea is that growth hackers think about how do we scale using the network effect, the normal way of I like something, I'll tell you I like something, you'll then use it, and we can connect together. They build that into the product. Growth hackers think about how they build this network effect into products. How many of you use Twitter? How many of you, when you started Twitter, were really grateful that it showed you some people to follow when you first started? Because you had no idea. You didn't even know where to start with Twitter. So Twitter already was using growth hacking to buy you into the concept of how do I use this technology? How do I connect with people? To build out the network. To build this, if I use it, you'll use it. Skype is exactly the same. If I use Skype, and I think Skype's great, me on my own with Skype, is that going to be of any use to me? Probably not, unless I'm egotistical. So the idea with Skype is, if I like it, I'm going to tell my friends I like it, I'll tell my parents I like it. How many of you use Skype today? That's fantastic. So keep going, keeps me paid. It's the only reason I can be here. Most people are using Skype now, and we spend an awful lot of time with growth hacking type concepts. We try and build into the product more and more of these things. You'll notice some of the features you'll be seeing coming out in the near future will increasingly use some of this growth hacking thinking to drive more engagement with you, to make life easier to onboard your friends and relatives. You'll already see that when you start, you can search for contacts already very, very quickly. And again, we're making that easier. But we're using this growth hacking, this building a network of people around you for nothing. It costs nothing to have a reference for somebody to refer your product to somebody else and have them use it. It costs you nothing to do experimentation. But the problem is, how many of you work for large organizations? Okay, so you have this. You've spent millions of lira building this. And suddenly you're going to go agile, you're going to use all this growth hacking culture, you're going to do all this experimentation on your customer base that you've spent millions building up your brand reputation, and suddenly you're going to try and do more experimentation with that market. You're going to try and get everybody to refer you to their friends and relatives. And when you get to scale, that becomes really challenging. How many of you think innovation is important? How many of you think you do innovation well in your companies? Look around. Look around. I don't understand. Who's killing it? Is it you? I don't understand. We all say we want it. Every large organisation in every different industry is now saying innovation is critical to our growth, our success. But most large brands, most large organisations would rather the world look like this, a beautiful Zen garden. They'd rather have the world completely predictable. No big waves, nothing, just gentle sailing on a Zen garden. But if you want innovation, innovation comes at the intersection of a number of things. It comes at the intersection of new technology. Who thinks new technology is more risky? Is new technology more risky or trusted technology more risky? You think new technology is less risky? Put your hand up if you think new technology is less risky. Put your hand up if you're still awake. Okay. Typically new technology in every project I've ever worked on, and I've worked on some interesting ones, including Harrier jump jet heads-up displays. Do you think we put new technology in Harrier heads-up, the heads-up technology that works in a Harrier jump jet very often? No. The Harrier jump jet, inside of it, uses core memory. Anybody familiar with core memory? Anybody who did an engineering degree? Core memory is magnetic memory. It is the first one of the first memory technologies we created. Why did we use core technology in the Harrier jump jet? It was trusted, and under a nuclear attack, it continued to function. So a pilot can continue to function in the air during a nuclear attack because the technology would continue to work. If you put it in a normal memory chip and a nuclear explosion occurred, there would be no memory left and the Harrier jump jet would fail to function. Old technology worked better than new technology. It was lower risk. But innovation appears at the intersection of other industries. How many of you partner with an industry in a different sector? Not many. Why? Some do. And then your organisation, how much can your organisation take? Complexity. The market, the suppliers, there's complexity there, and then the teams themselves. In the intersection is innovation, but in the intersection of these things is also risk. And your brand, those growth hackers that are trying to experiment and build a market and create a network, and you've given them no money or very little money, have to work in this space. So their world looks like this. I had fun drawing this one. Their world looks like this. The world they see is messy. How many of you work on software that is more than 5 years old? How many of you wish you could rewrite that? Yeah? Because you know it's messy. And many of us who write code, when you go back and look at a piece of code you wrote a year ago, how proud are you? Okay, so the marketplace looks like this. And the technologies, a lot of the technologies we use look like this. They're not that Zen garden. The other interesting fact here is, this is the adoption of technology, how fast technology was adopted over time, new technology as it came in. This is from the New York Times. So, for those of you who can't see it, I'm going to just point a few things out. This is the telephone. If you follow the dotted line, it was back in the 1900s the telephone was created, sort of first came in. The telephone, to 100% adoption, is still not there more than 100 years later. If you look at the internet started in 1990 and is already at 60%. Look at the speed at which a new innovation is being adopted. Your customers want innovation, they adopt it faster, and if you don't build it, the young startup who has no money will use growth hacking to get there first. So you have no choice. Your brand has no choice. You're in an interesting place. I work within Microsoft now, and again, why do you think Satya is now saying, the new CEO is saying we need to be growth hackers? Because we know that we have to get ahead of this curve. But there's another fact. If you're a venture capitalist in the IT sector, in the startup world, you know that 90% of startups fail. Let me just say that again. 90% of startups fail, and they're the guys doing all the innovation. Sorry, guys, I'm sure you'll be in the 10. But that means if you're a big brand and you're using this growth hacking type way of working, 9 out of 10 of your experiments will fail. How comfortable do you think your CEO is going to be to listen to that message? Do you think they're going to be, how many of you think they'll be happy? Okay. Ooh. So, the first thing that's not going to happen is you're not going to get away with just having a big brain. The smartest guy in the room no longer wins. Why? Because the world is too complicated for the smartest brain to understand everything. There's many cultures that I've worked in where you always go to Kasim. Kasim knows the most about this part of the technology. So I'm going to go and ask Kasim. But Kasim can't know everything about the marketplace. Kasim can't know everything about every new technology that's coming on. Kasim won't know everything about all the systems you're trying to integrate. So the big brain's not going to work anymore. This is one of the models. How many of you are familiar with this model, the Cynefin model? Some, not all. Okay. Again, the references are at the back of the slide deck. The whole idea is we have a number of ways of looking at the area of problem space we're looking at. Things can be very simple, so we can predict very easily that the outcomes are known in the environment we're working in. In the marketplace, we know what will happen. In the market we operate in, it's very simple. You can have chaotic, where we need to use wisdoms of the crowds kind of thinking, where it's completely unknown. And then we have complicated, where we kind of know there is a known outcome and a known path to get to the solution, but the solution itself is complicated. Building a new space shuttle is complicated. Why? Because we know how to do it, but there's many things that need to come together to make that happen. The space that most of you and I operate in is in the complex space, where we only know the outcome at the end of doing the research. My grandmother used to say to me, life is a hard teacher. You get the lesson after the test. That's the world of complicated. You don't know what the answer is until you've put something out there and tried it and get the feedback. You have to probe the environment, send probes out. Human beings are incredibly poor at operating in the complex space because we want the outcome to be either complicated or simple. Many of you today will walk away and fall into the mistake of thinking the project you're working on is complicated. You know what the outcome is going to be. Here has a customer service, she's on the customer service desk for your bank or your insurance company, and she gets a call from a customer saying, I've tried your website, I hate it. Salim over here, the developer, is coding away in JavaScript as happy as anything on your website. This is how long it takes Salim to work out there is a problem. Is that a very effective way of that communication happening? No. But most organizations work this way. However, if there was bad news about the fact that people were being lost their jobs here, you can bet that in the coffee room, Salim would know it straight away. We need to use that. So we need to use the network effect in our own organisations. We need to build in technologies that allow our organisations to communicate more effectively. It seems madness to me. But what we do is we use all this growth hacking type thinking of trying to create a network and have people promote our brand to other people outside. And inside our organisation we go, no, we shall use hierarchies. We shall make sure that people only communicate up because as a manager I need to know everything. The reality of it is you don't know everything. Many studies now show that the informal networks work way faster than the your organisational network, your hierarchy. We've spent a long time in Skype, and in IBM we spent a vast amount of time, and we spend a long time in Skype and into Microsoft, building communities, internal communities, agile communities where people get together and share information, that share good practice. I always find it ironic, and it's so, how many of you have teams where you have some teams doing really great things here, and yet you can walk 200 meters here, and these teams suck. And you're going, that's not Scrum. I don't know what that is. You're kind of standing up every day. But these guys over, and you're going, do you guys ever talk? I didn't even know they existed. And yet you put some food in a room. We are so like animals, by the way. We are still animals, right? Put food in a room with monkeys. We are the monkeys. Put the bananas in the room, create an interesting topic. We think pair programming is great, is a good start. The number of debates we've had between people going, I hate it, versus I love it, is really interesting. But what's more interesting is people will come together and talk, and they will start to be your network. And don't ignore those. The other thing I've learned about this change piece is don't ignore the people who don't come. Because otherwise you create this. We all have a big hug. All the people who love Agile come together and hug each other. Oh, it's so lovely. And then the people out there are going, they are just weird. They're the strange people who live on the edge of the village. Yeah, so try and engage with those too. Provoke them. We use gamification. Again, we'll talk about gamification a bit later. One of the speakers is going to tell us about gamification. We use gamification. We're starting to use this concept, we call them Powerups, where we write down some of the good things that teams do, and we describe them so that teams share those with each other, good practice. And then we gamify that. We start to reward people for using them. Just be aware of this. I'm coming to the end now. This is when you look at the way we communicate. Motivated and informed people are your hotshots. They're the people who will actually go around and spread the right message for you. They'll be the people you will talk to. They'll know the message. They'll talk about it. The slow burners will just sit there and they won't do a lot. They'll just go, I don't know what's happening, and nobody's talking to me. The saboteurs are interesting because they do know exactly what's happening, but they really don't like it. And they're going to be your bad news bringers. Go find them. Bring them on board, and if you can't change the people, then change the people. I'm sorry, I'm not a big believer in this old, let's give you a big hug and eventually it'll be better. Some of these people will never change, and they will sit there and they will push back and they will make life hard, and eventually they will succeed in pockets, and you will fight them forever. If you can't move them along, then they need to move on. The unguided missiles are where you also should spend time. Unguided missiles they're really motivated. A lot of you may know or be these people. Really motivated. I love this new Kanban thing. Your whole organisation has gone Scrum. I love Kanban. I'm going to go quickly marauding through the organisation, telling them about Kanban. And you're going, we're not doing Kanban. Yes, but no. Let's just do Scrum, and then we'll work out when we move to Kanban. Or those kinds of things. Yeah? So just be aware that those unguided missiles, work with them. They're really passionate. Use that energy, drive that energy with you. So in summary, give these growth hackers the skills to fail safely. Give them the techniques, use the lab brand, create a small set of experiments on small markets, use internal test, use an internal small group of people to test it for you. Okay? Use that. Get those people thinking about how they will fail safely, how they'll use risk. Get them to think of, most agile people don't, most of the agile developers I've come across, you talk about risk, they've got no idea. In fact, I spoke to somebody who's pretty high up in the Scrum community, and I said, you know what, I've worked on sort of safety critical, mission critical systems, Harrier heads-up displays, medical systems. We used Agile, but it doesn't talk about risk lists, having a risk list. How many of you have a risk list? Oh, it's not Agile, is it? You can't have a risk list if you're Agile, right? No, Scrum has impediments. But to me, impediments are issues. They've already happened. It's too late. So one of the things you should start to think about is, as I spoke to this guy, I said, so can I have a risk list? And we had this whole debate backwards and forwards. Many cups of coffee were drunk. We went away, we came back, and in the end his comment was, well, Scrum doesn't say you can't have a risk list. So my advice to you is, if you're in a big brand where you don't want to be the person who destroys your brand for the sake of Agile, think about risk, talk about risk, talk about how you're managing risk. The Agile Mirror is the way to actually show you're managing risk. You'll have the ability to check that every 2 weeks. Make it safe to fail. And then communicate about this way of working. Communicate about managing risk. Communicate about the experimentation. Communicate that small failures are lessons, are learning. We are happy to learn in a safe way. We want that to happen. We cannot innovate without failing. But we need to do it safely. If we don't innovate, we die. Because the small startups have nothing to lose. They will and they should. They should be snapping at our heels, forcing us to take on board these ways of working. These are the guys I've worked with. I would like to say thank you to all those. I think it's only fair. And thank you very much.